Gen Z has a huge health problem. Gen Z is on track to becoming the unhealthiest generation on record. Despite having access to an enormous amount of health knowledge, cooking knowledge, and overall the ability to literally deliver groceries to their door, it seems more and more that Gen Z just doesn't know how to cook. Put bluntly, Gen Z has become incapable of cooking. Gen Z's lack of cooking has led the generation to abandon healthy, nutritious meals for high-carb, over-processed foods. Many believe that cooking has become a luxury, and it's not just all Gen Z's fault. Is this true? In this video, we're gonna dive into how Gen Z got here, what it means for the future of Gen Z's health, and what can be done to resolve this trend. First and foremost, we have to discuss how cooking in itself is a dying activity. More and more young people have experienced anxiety when it comes to cooking. Young adults who have anxiety are way less likely to cook home-cooked meals. They have a fear of messing up. Some may even have fears of going to the grocery store. It's no secret that Gen Z reports higher levels of anxiety than any other generation before them. A 2023 survey found that 42% of Gen Z said they have been diagnosed with a mental health condition, and 57% reported feeling anxious most or if not all the time. So if they're feeling anxious most of the time, then they're not going to want to go through all the effort that is and the uncertainty that comes with cooking a home-cooked meal. You can even point some blame at social media, where many are constantly seeing chef-style dishes right in front of them, which can have them feeling unmotivated and intimidated. And then came the pandemic. The pandemic fundamentally changed how we eat. Food delivery already existed, but once lockdowns began and restaurants closed, grocery store shelves were bare, and many young people weren't comfortable going outside, let alone shopping in person. This was the moment when food delivery became a lifeline. And for Gen Z, it quickly became the norm. Today, Gen Z is ordering delivery in droves. Around 40% of Gen Z and millennials use food delivery apps at least once a week, compared to just 21.5% for Gen X and only 10% for boomers. Gen Z views food delivery as the ultimate convenience, and for many, it has become essential to their lifestyle. The average Gen Z user orders delivery 3 to 4 times a week. The real problem here isn't just convenience, it's what they're ordering. Many of the most popular choices are extremely unhealthy. Take, for example, Crumble cookies. The brand was exposed for just how sugary their products are. One of their 2024 holiday cookies had a whopping 1,200 calories. That's almost an entire day's worth of calories in one cookie. Another go-to for Gen Z is Chipotle. While not inherently unhealthy, most Chipotle menu items are extremely high in calories. So if someone orders Chipotle for lunch and then gets takeout again for dinner, they're most likely overeating by a good bit. A study of the top global and UK takeout chains, they found that over 75% of their best-selling items were unhealthy, and they were packed with excessive salt, fat, sugar, or even calories. A Cornell study found that just being exposed to food delivery apps, not really even ordering anything, it actually increased the likelihood of someone ordering unhealthy food by 22%. Now that probably makes sense. You see a cheeseburger online, you probably want to buy it at some point in the week. The researchers have called this phenomenon cyber food swamps. Gen Z has access to every food imaginable at their fingertips. But what happens when you give an entire generation raised on instant gratification the keys to unlimited convenience? You get a generation with rising rates of obesity, diabetes, and poor health outcomes. According to the CDC, 20% of Gen Z teens aged around 12 to 19 were obese in 2024. That's higher than any previous generation before them at that same age. For comparison, back in the 1990s, just 10 to 12% of Gen X teens were obese. Gen Z's sugar consumption is projected to cause a 700% increase in diabetes by 2060. Simply put, Gen Z's health crisis can be directly linked to their lack of cooking and their reliance on delivery, and processed foods. Now, there's one major factor where I think we can cut Gen Z some slack, and that's the fact that food quality has drastically declined over the years. The mass overproduction of food and the for-profit model that now dominates the industry have absolutely played a negative role in the decline of everyone's health in the country. Back in the 1960s, food quality was much higher across the board. Every pound of meat or gallon of milk that you got would be comparable to today's premium brands. There really wasn't this massive gap in quality because most of the food that was produced locally. Organic wasn't really a label you needed because most of the food was already grown without the heavy use of synthetic chemicals or artificial preservatives. Now that all changed when store brands like Great Value came into the scene, introducing a more capitalistic, profit-driven model for food production. Today you have to spend anywhere from 2 to 5 times more just to get the same level of food quality that used to be the standard. Food has become ultra processed to the point of no return. Additives are everywhere. Sure, they help fast food last longer and they make it easier to transport, but they do so at the expense of nutritional quality and long-term health. A 2023 study found that 60% of foods purchased by American households contain multiple additives, up from 50% in 2001. On average, each food product now has 4.5 additives compared to just 3.7 in 2001. These additives aren't just for flavor. They include preservatives, artificial dyes, and other ingredients that are being linked to serious long-term health issues. That data directly supports the idea that Gen Z is eating worse food with worse ingredients than any other previous generation before them, at least in our modern American era, at least over the past 100 years. And with grocery prices rising, Gen Z is already strapped for cash. They're already having a very hard time out there, and they're more likely to buy the cheapest food options available. That means more frozen foods, more snacks, and more ultra-processed meals. Gen Z has been called both the snack generation and the frozen food generation. And there's truth behind both of those labels. But the issue is that all those snacks and frozen pizzas are loaded with sodium, sugar, and chemical fillers. Even if you're cooking with store-brand ingredients at home, it's still a lot better of an option than heating up another frozen dinner. Millennials and Gen Z actually account for the biggest growth in frozen food purchases today. The American Frozen Food Institute reported in 2023 that frozen food entree sales jumped by more than 25% among 18 to 29-year-olds in just 2 years. Now, food companies love this trend. Frozen food lasts longer, and it offers a lot higher profit margin than fresher ingredients. Now, the occasional frozen meal is fine, but the problem is that Gen Z isn't just eating frozen meals. They're replacing real cooking with frozen meals entirely. And something that we got to talk about is just how the quality of frozen foods has seriously declined over the past decades. In the 1980s and the 1990s, frozen meals used to have a lot more whole ingredients, a lot more healthier ingredients. Veggies weren't cooked to mush, sodium levels were pretty low, and overall nutritional value was a lot higher. Today, frozen foods are engineered for maximum shelf life and low production costs. They're not really produced for quality. As of 2022, 90% of frozen entrees are considered ultra processed under the NOVA food classification system. And between 2004 and 2022, the average sodium content in frozen dinners has rose by more than 15%. While fiber content has dropped by 10%. So the frozen foods your parents ate aren't the same frozen foods that Gen Z is eating today. And sure, there are a lot of premium brands out there that aren't that bad for you, but those are marketed as a luxury and come with a high price tag. Because of rising shipping, packaging, and ingredient costs, manufacturers are cutting corners just to keep frozen meals affordable. They're swapping out real ingredients with filler starches like corn syrup solids or potato flakes. They're using thinner plastic trays and less eco-friendly packaging. In other words, frozen food has gotten a lot less healthy. A 2023 Consumer Reports study actually found that many frozen meals, even premium brands, have reduced protein levels and added more fillers since 2020. At the same time, Gen Z is gobbling these things up. I mean, it's not hard to understand why. Cooking feels overwhelming for so many in Gen Z. And frozen meals are pretty simple. You just take the food out of the packaging, you put it in the microwave, wait 5 minutes, and there you go, you got a meal. But past generations really didn't rely on them the same way that Gen Z does now. Boomers and Gen Xers were a lot more reliant on home-cooked meals, even if they were basic. In 1985, just 13% of meals were frozen or heavily processed. But in 2022, over 50% of Gen Z's dinners now include a frozen or pre-packaged element. Another major factor that we need to talk about here is the erosion of cooking education in schools. In 1992, 25% of high schoolers in the US actually took a home economics class. Home economics was a pretty standard subject. Many of my Gen Z or millennial viewers will probably not really remember those days, but by 2013, that number of 25% dropped to just 5%. Home economics was really a program that started in the early 1900s, and it took off during the 1950s and the 1960s. It was a class mostly targeted towards women, where they learned traditional gender role activities like cleaning, cooking, and family care. The course was very popular at the time, and despite pushing outdated gender stereotypes, it gave many young people a solid foundation on how to cook. In those classes, you learn how to cook a basic omelet. Yet today, a recent survey found that only 39% of Gen Z actually knew how to cook an omelet. Home ec eventually evolved to include men as well, but its overall popularity and institutional support faded. You can really see this shift happening in the early 2000s, when the No Child Left Behind era of standardized testing really took over. Many school districts scrapped home ec altogether. Schools became more focused on preparing kids for paper tests than real life. I think part of the problem is that home ec really enforced gender stereotypes. During the 70s and 80s, many women rightfully questioned the entire premise of the course. As gender roles evolved, it made sense to rethink the entire curriculum overall. So many school districts actually rebranded home ec and expanded it to include men. The courses now offer nutrition science, financial literacy, career planning, and early childhood development. That was a solid concept. It became a class about life skills, not just how to serve your future husband. But even with the rebranding of home ec, they really failed to shake off its outdated image. It really didn't do a great job at persuading boys to join. By 1994, only 15% of home ec students were males. In 2013, that number only rose slightly to 20%. And because society never really placed value in learning how to cook, the course faded into irrelevance. Home ec was never truly reimagined for anyone, and so most of Gen Z never really learned how to cook, and now many of our younger generations are paying the price. Things today are a lot different than they were in the 1960s. We live in a society that never really solved the cooking dilemma. Once women entered the workforce and the traditional nuclear family dissolved, families were left ill-equipped to keep up. Their best option was to buy frozen foods or buy fast food. Forget teaching them how to cook eggs or balancing a checkbook. You got to learn how to do this test. As a result, we're now left with millennial and Gen X parents, so people in their 30s and 50s, who largely don't really know how to cook for themselves, let alone teach their children. These parents are obsessed with eating out, often spending hundreds of dollars a month on takeout or dining out. This lack of cooking knowledge at home has created even worse cooks in Gen Z. So if Gen Z didn't learn how to cook at school and didn't learn to cook at home either, many were left to fend for themselves in a tempting world of food delivery apps and girl dinners made up of snacks and sugar. Honestly, I don't think the people who removed home ec classes ever realized just how enormous the consequences of that decision would be. And the Gen Z health epidemic is a perfect example of how those decisions echo across generation. So let's take a step back and look at what all this means. Gen Z's lack of cooking knowledge, their obsession with food delivery, and their over-reliance on ultra-processed food meals is setting them up for serious health consequences down the road. The health crisis we're seeing today with American adults might pale in comparison as Gen Z enters their middle years. If these trends continue, we're on a collision course. The data is black and white. Gen Z is already experiencing higher levels of obesity and disease. The lack of cooking isn't just some quirky generational trend. It's a massive public health concern. This isn't just about Gen Z being lazy. It's about structural failures. It's about the gradual but devastating decline in food quality. It's about the way that food delivery and fast food have normalized unhealthy eating. It's about how corporate food giants cut corners under the radar while consumers are left unaware and underserved. If we don't teach Gen Z how to cook, how to eat better, how to navigate the food system, they'll suffer the consequences. And it just won't be them. We'll all pay for the healthcare costs, the economic strain, and the loss of productivity that comes with an unhealthy generation. So where does this leave us? Well, first, schools should bring back home economics, or at least a lot more modernized version. Let's teach every student how to cook, budget, and take care of themselves. Those are basic life skills. These just aren't extra skills, they're essential skills. We also need to raise awareness. Gen Z should know just how unhealthy their favorite brands are. It's not just about banning fast foods or shaming people for eating cookies. It's about giving them the information they need to make better choices. Because if you're eating crumble cookies and canes 5 times a week, you're gonna feel it. Maybe not now, but definitely in the future. And finally, as a society, we have to be aware of just how much our food quality has declined over the past few decades. Food conglomerates, in an effort to maintain profits and appease shareholders, are slowly stripping the nutritional value from our food. Year after year, they sneak in more fillers, cut corners, and quietly shift us towards worse health outcomes. It's no secret that America is in a huge health crisis, but Gen Z's version of this health crisis might be a whole lot worse. But what do you guys think? Is this a problem of Gen Z's own making, or is this a huge societal issue overall? Let me know in the comments section below. Be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out, and it helps shine a spotlight on issues like this. And like always, we'll be back with another video. Stay informed out there.